I'm Ryan Colburn, 29 years old. 2 months ago, my sister pushed me through a glass wall and left me in a coma. They thought I was dead. They even forged my signature to steal everything I built. But today I limped into that courtroom with the will in my hands, ready to take it all back. They said I wouldn't walk again, that I might not wake up. But there I was, stepping slowly into the courtroom of Harris County Courthouse in Houston, Texas. Every muscle in my legs screaming with each step, a pair of crutches pressed under my arms. The dark suit hung looser on my frame than it used to. I had lost nearly 30 pounds during those 3 weeks in the ICU. But I was alive, and I was here. Heads turned the moment I crossed the threshold. The murmurs fell off like a wave receding from shore. I could feel every eye on me, but I only looked at 3 faces. My mother, Ellen Prescott, sitting stiffly in her beige jacket, her mouth slightly agape. My father, Thomas, beside her, looking older than I remembered, his eyes wide, unsure, and my sister, Madison. Her lips parted just for a second, then curled into something that tried to be a smile but collapsed under its own weight. I looked her straight in the eye. She didn't look away. I moved slowly down the aisle, the wood of the benches on either side creaking as people adjusted in their seats to get a better look. The judge hadn't entered yet, but the bailiff nodded at me with a quiet kind of respect. The kind you give a man who came back from something no one thought he could survive. I took my seat beside Ben, my attorney. He was already rifling through papers, but when he saw me, he gave me a short nod. "You ready for this?" Ryan, I adjusted the strap of my backpack, feeling the hard edge of the manila folder inside. Everything was in there. My will, the contract, the notarized signatures, the truth. "Yeah," I said, "let's do this." Ben leaned in a little. "Just stick to the facts. Let the paperwork do the talking. This isn't about drama, it's about proof." I nodded, even though my heart was pounding. This wasn't just about proof. This was about taking back what was mine, what they tried to bury with me. The courtroom door creaked open. The bailiff stood. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Rowe." We stood. My legs ached. My palms were already sweaty against the grips of the crutches. Judge Rowe, a tall black woman in her 60s with a steel gaze, took her seat and looked around the courtroom before speaking. "Be seated." She shuffled some papers, then looked up. "This is case number 247B Colburn versus Colburn et al. Regarding claims of contract fraud and unlawful transfer of ownership. Counsel, state your appearances." Ben stood, introduced us. Across the room, a gray-haired man in a slick navy suit did the same for Madison and my parents. I didn't hear their names. I was watching Madison. She hadn't blinked once since I walked in, not a twitch. I could see the tension in her jaw, the way her hands tightened into fists in her lap. Judge Rowe leaned forward. "Mr. Colburn, I'm told this is your first public appearance since your accident. Is that correct?" I stood slowly, steadying myself. "Yes, Your Honor." She looked at me longer than necessary, then nodded once. "All right, let's begin." She gestured to Ben. He rose and opened the folder. I watched my mother shift in her seat, watched my father glance at her like he was asking a silent question. Madison didn't move. "Your Honor, we have submitted to the court a notarized last will and testament dated September 14th, 2022, clearly indicating that all intellectual property related to the development of the Cerebrus AI Health Project belongs solely to Mr. Ryan Colburn." Ben placed the document in front of the court clerk. As he did, Madison finally turned to our parents, whispering something. My mother's face turned pale. Ben continued. Additionally, we have included evidence that this will was unlawfully ignored during the plaintiff's hospitalization following a documented fall on November 8, 2022. Medical reports confirm a coma lasting 21 days during which the defendants acted without legal authority to transfer ownership. There were some audible whispers behind us. The judge banged her gavel once. "This is not a trial yet. It's a hearing. Keep the courtroom silent," she turned back to the defense attorney. "Your response." The man stood smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, the defense contends that there was verbal consent given by Mr. Colburn prior to the incident. Furthermore, at the time of the transaction, the defendants were acting under the impression that the plaintiff would not recover." I wanted to shout, "That's not how the law works. You don't just take what doesn't belong to you because you think someone won't wake up." But I didn't say anything. I looked at the judge instead. She was already raising an eyebrow. "Verbal consent. Do you have recordings, witnesses?" "We have testimony from the sister Madison Colburn and the mother Ellen Prescott confirming such a conversation." I could feel the heat rising in my neck. Ben placed a hand on my arm under the table, grounding me. "Your Honor, we will later provide evidence to the contrary, but more urgently I would ask that the court review this notarized documentation and consider a temporary injunction preventing any further transactions involving the Cerebras IP until the matter is fully resolved." Judge Rowe looked down at the documents. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her eyes pause on the notary seal. "Very well. I will review the evidence and determine the validity of the will and the request for injunction." She looked back up at me. "Mr. Colburn, you have a lot to prove, and from what I see, a lot to reclaim." "Yes, Your Honor." The gavel struck once. We recessed. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Ben leaned close again. "You just changed the game." I looked across the room. Madison wasn't smiling anymore. She wasn't looking at me at all. 2 months earlier, the fluorescent lights in the Biocore AI office buzzed faintly overhead. I remember the way the late October sunlight hit the edge of the hallway windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished tile floors. We had just come out of a boardroom meeting. I was holding the signed contract in my hand, still warm from the printer. $12 million. 12 years of work finally recognized. Madison caught up to me in the hallway before I could reach the elevator. She had that look again, the one she used to wear when we were kids, and I beat her at something she thought she deserved more. Her heels clicked sharply behind me, echoing down the hall. "You went behind my back," she hissed, her voice low but boiling. "You submitted the final build without looping me in." I turned around, still holding the folder. "I didn't need to loop you in. You weren't the lead on this, Maddie. You were supposed to handle the clinical data processing, and you did. I built Cerebras from the ground up." She stepped closer. Her face was flushed, her fists clenched. "And you think you did that alone, without the company's infrastructure? Without me, I stayed late for months because of your impossible standards." "That's not what this is about," I said, feeling my pulse pick up. "This is about credit. You want your name on something that wasn't yours." Her voice rose. "I gave up years of my life for this. I made sacrifices you can't even imagine, Ryan. And now you think you get to sign the contract alone. Take the payout. Take the press." The hallway was empty, silent except for us. Everyone else had gone back to their offices, just the two of us locked in this impossible pattern. "You think you're the only one who gave up something?" I snapped. "I haven't slept a full night in a year. I put everything into this project while you were still jockeying for committee promotions. You want a bonus, fine. But this IP is mine." Her eyes narrowed. "You selfish bastard." She lunged forward. I didn't expect her to touch me. I thought she'd scream or maybe throw something at the wall, but she shoved me. Hard. Her palm hit my chest and I stumbled back. It was supposed to stop there. A push and argument, siblings fighting. But I hit the window frame, not the wall. My back slammed into the edge of the glass panel lining the second-floor hallway. The crack sounded like lightning, and then everything dropped. I don't remember falling. I remember the glass giving way, the sudden cold rush of air, and then nothing. Silence, then pain, then even more silence. When I opened my eyes again, weeks had passed. The ICU ceiling was white, blinding. My throat burned. There was a tube taped near my mouth, the steady beep of monitors nearby. I couldn't speak. I could barely move. The world was reduced to beeping shallow breaths and flickers of nurses moving in and out like shadows. But no family, not a single visit, not a single hand on mine. They told me later that Madison had been the one to sign the emergency release documents, that she claimed our parents were out of state, unreachable, that she told the hospital I had left her as my medical proxy. I never had. I hadn't left anyone as my proxy. I'd never needed to. The first nurse to speak to me like I was awake and thinking was Erin. She had dark circles under her eyes and wore her brown hair in a messy braid that fell over her shoulder like she hadn't slept in days. She came in to check my IV, looked down and blinked. "Ryan." Her voice was quiet. "Can you hear me?" I blinked once. She leaned closer. "If you can understand me, blink twice." I did. "Oh, thank God," she whispered. I didn't understand why she sounded relieved, not just professionally, personally. Later, when they removed the breathing tube and I could rasp out a few words, I asked about my family. "No one's been here," she said carefully. "At least not while I've been on shift." "How long?" 21 days, she answered, checking the monitor. "You've been in a coma for 3 weeks." I lay there staring at the ceiling. My arms felt like stone, my legs even heavier, my mouth dry and full of cotton. She reached for a water cup with a straw and held it to my lips. "Your sister came in on the 2nd day, signed some paperwork. That's about it." "What paperwork?" She paused. "I'll ask the attending physician." But I could see it in her eyes. She already knew. That night I asked her to leave the lights off. I lay awake listening to the machines, the steady beat of the heart monitor, and thought about the way Madison looked at me in that hallway. Not with anger, not even betrayal. It was entitlement, as if I had taken something from her that she was born to have. I thought of the way she pushed me, the look on her face, how quickly she had moved to take control when she thought I wouldn't wake up. She didn't expect me to survive, and if I hadn't, Cerebrus would have become hers. I stayed awake until morning, and the morning after that. I began asking questions. Slowly, quietly. Erin started bringing me copies of my own medical paperwork printed from the hospital system. And in one of those folders I found it, my signature, on a transfer of ownership form. Dated November 10th, 2 days after the fall. The only problem was, I had been in a coma, and that signature wasn't mine. I stared at the forged signature, my own name written in someone else's hand. Slanted differently. The loop on the R was too round, the Y too stiff. It was a bad copy, but good enough to slip past someone who wasn't looking closely. I wasn't even awake when it was filed. And that was exactly the point. That night, lying in that sterile hospital bed, I thought about all the things that had led here. Not just the fall, not just Madison's ambition, deeper than that. Things that began before either of us ever walked into BioCore. Things that started in a small house in Cypress Hollow, 20 minutes north of Houston. where Madison was always the golden child and I was just the kid who got good grades but never quite fit in. My mother used to say Madison had leadership qualities. She called it charm. She called my curiosity difficult. I remember once when we were 10 and 12, Madison pushed me down the stairs after I beat her at a math competition. I split my chin open. My mother told me not to provoke her sister. I told myself to toughen up. Madison got the bigger bedroom, the better bike, the first iPhone. I got the leftovers and hand-me-downs and advice about being more like her. I learned early that fairness wasn't a thing in our house. At first, I tried to win my mom's approval by excelling by disappearing into books and robotics kits. When that didn't work, I stopped trying. I started building. Cerebrus started on a notepad in a college dorm room. I poured every hour outside of classes into it. While Madison was getting a degree in healthcare management and using my last name to network her way into mid-level jobs, I was coding deep learning models and pitching professors on my vision. She mocked it at Thanksgiving once, called it a toy. Now it was worth $12 million. And when I went down when she thought I wouldn't wake up, she took it. Of course she did. She'd been waiting her whole life for someone to say she deserved it more. But it wasn't just her. The paperwork had 2 signatures. The forged one was mine. The second was my mother's. The page was stamped, signed, and witnessed. Ellen Prescott, legal guardian, consenting party. I asked Erin quietly one morning if anyone questioned the documents. She gave me that cautious look she always wore when hospital politics came into play. They had the notary and your mother's statement. No one really pushed it. Did she ask about me? No. Erin hesitated. Honestly, I think they were waiting for a different outcome. She didn't say the word, but I heard it loud and clear. My mother hadn't come to see me. Not once. Not after the accident. Not during recovery. She hadn't even called the hospital, but she had signed the forms that gave my sister legal control over everything I'd built. My jaw tightened so hard it ached. I looked back at the ceiling, the familiar dots in the tiles now etched into my memory like constellations. Something had shifted in me since I woke up. The old Ryan would have rationalized this, would have looked for understanding, tried to make peace. But that Ryan had died at the bottom of that marble stairwell. What rose in his place was someone who had seen betrayal wearing a familiar face. I couldn't move fast yet. My muscles were weak, my hands shaky, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. Every thought had sharp edges. Every breath was fuel. I asked Erin for a laptop. She got one from the rehab wing and wheeled it in at night after most of the staff were gone. She even brought me an extra pillow to prop my arm up so I could type. Slowly, painfully, I pulled up backup records from my cloud drive drafts of Cerebrus code with timestamps, emails from the patent office. The original contracts. I started compiling a timeline. Every file had to matter. Every file had to prove that I was the sole architect. Then I found it, buried in my shared legal folder, a scanned PDF, dated September 14th, a notarized copy of my last will and testament. I had filed it before we finalized the deal with BioCore. It explicitly stated that in the event of death or incapacitation, all rights to Cerebrus would remain in a trust controlled by me with no power of transfer granted to anyone, including family. There it was, the thing they hadn't found, or maybe they had and just ignored it. But this one was the original, with signatures, witnesses, state seals. I printed it in the rehab center's office under Erin's badge. She didn't ask what I was doing. She just handed me the pages in silence, then turned and left. I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of it. This wasn't just paper. It was the tether to everything they thought they'd erased. The recovery team said I was making fast progress. I didn't tell them why. I didn't tell them that every set of stairs I climbed in therapy was driven by rage. that every grip I tightened on the parallel bars was me imagining Madison's hand, shoving me back. They told me I could be discharged in a week. I didn't wait that long. I called Ben Foster from the hospital conference room on a borrowed phone. He had interned for one of the BioCorps attorneys years ago and owed me a favor from grad school. When I told him what had happened, he cursed under his breath and asked me to email him everything. I did. 2 days later, he was sitting in my hospital room, suit-pressed hair slicked back, a fire in his eyes. "You've got a case," he said, "a strong one. And if they argue I gave verbal consent, then we bury them in documentation." He tapped the printed will. "This is the kill shot. My discharge papers came through that Friday." Erin hugged me before I left. It was the first human touch I had felt in over a month. "Be careful," she whispered. "People who do what they did, they don't just give up." I nodded, slipping the folder into my backpack. I knew she was right, but they weren't the only ones who had changed. The fluorescent lights in the ICU never turned off. They just dimmed slightly past midnight, casting the room in a permanent twilight that made it hard to tell day from night. Time blurred into medication schedules and machine beeps broken only by the occasional murmur of nurses making rounds or the soft hum of stretchers rolling down the hall. Erin Woods was always there, quiet, focused, but never cold. She moved like someone who understood the value of silence. I didn't know her name at first. I only knew her by the scent of her hand lotion and the way her sneakers squeaked differently than the others. She was the one who turned my body every few hours to prevent bed sores, who cleaned the tubes and wiped down the machines. I didn't know it then, but she was also the one who noticed things weren't adding up. 3 days after I woke up, when my voice was still too dry to carry, she sat beside me after her shift and said something that stuck. "They changed your file. Twice. Once before you were admitted to the main system and again 2 days after. That's not normal." She looked down the hall before continuing. "I wasn't supposed to see it. I was just cross-referencing meds. But your record said next of kin was your sister. Then it changed to your mother. No signatures, just changed." I watched her face. She wasn't scared. She was angry. "Did you tell anyone?" Her lips pressed into a line. "I did once. My supervisor told me it was a sensitive family matter. He said if I kept asking questions, I'd be reassigned to long-term geriatric. I couldn't speak much yet, but I didn't need to. My eyes must have said enough. Someone else on the night shift told me to stay out of it. He said your family had legal power of attorney. But when I asked to see the document, it wasn't in your chart. I've worked in this unit 7 years. That's not how we do things here." She pulled a folded note from her pocket. It was a photocopy of a fax confirmation. The number had been redacted, but the date read November 10th. The subject line said, "Ownership transfer Cerebris Holdings." "They sent it while you were still in critical condition," she said. "You were still on full life support, no consent, no clearance from ethics review, just a fax and a signature." The oxygen monitor beeped softly in the background. I watched the green line pulse on the screen beside me, feeling like I was watching someone else's life. None of this felt real. None of it should have been possible. "Boy, help me," I finally rasped. She looked down, hesitated, then looked back at me. "Because I know what it feels like when no one shows up." She didn't explain further. She didn't have to. That night, I asked her to turn off the overhead light. She dimmed it to its lowest setting and closed the blinds. The room fell into a deep gray silence. I lay awake listening to the machines and thought about the nights I must have spent here unconscious while they discussed what would happen to everything I created. I imagined my sister signing those papers without blinking. My mother nodding, probably still dressed in her tennis club whites. No calls, no visits, just signatures. In the early days after I woke up, Erin told me small things. That my file had been flagged for insurance adjustments. That my chart had missing notations about cognitive response tests. She told me that when I came in, I didn't have a wallet on me. No ID. Someone else had checked me in. They said you fell at work, but the incident report listed no witnesses, no police report, no internal investigation. It just said you slipped and fell. I tried to process that. I knew BioCore had internal HR policies. A fall like mine during a workday should have triggered a report. At minimum, an internal review. Madison must have shut it down, or paid someone to keep it quiet. Erin pulled up a chair closer to my bed that night and sat down without speaking. The shift nurse passed in the hallway without stopping. The door was half closed. The monitors buzzed faintly in the background. "You were alone when you came in," she said. "No emergency contact, no family waiting. You coded once in the ambulance. They almost called time of death." She looked at me differently then, not like a nurse, like someone who had seen something she couldn't forget. "But when I saw your hands," she paused, "I knew you weren't done. People who give up don't hold tension like that." My throat tightened. I wanted to tell her I wasn't done, that I wasn't going to let this end here. But I couldn't form the words. Not yet. She stood up and pulled the blanket higher around my chest. "Get some rest, Ryan. You've got a lot to come back to." She stepped out, her shoes squeaking faintly down the hall. I stared at the ceiling, the soft shadows dancing above me in the low light. Somewhere outside this room, my name had been stripped off every contract, every credit line, every patent. I had been erased from my own work like I was already gone. But I was still here. And I was starting to remember exactly who I was. The morning I signed my discharge papers, the sky over Boulder was pale gray and threatening snow. I wore clothes Erin had picked up for me from a local Goodwill, jeans a size too big, and a sweatshirt that said University of Colorado alumni, even though I'd never gone there. My legs still ached. I used a cane to steady myself down the hospital steps. Erin offered to drive me, but I told her no. I needed to do this part alone. The rideshare dropped me at a small, outdated apartment building just off Arapahoe Avenue. The listing online had been vague, but it was cheap and close to everything I needed. The landlord barely looked up when I signed the lease, just handed me a key and pointed me to the third floor. The unit smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner. There was a single mattress on the floor, a scratched kitchen table, and a flickering fluorescent light above the sink. It was perfect. I spent the first night sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the traffic lights changing color, wondering how many lives were being lived just outside my view. Mine had been paused for almost a month. Now it was back on, and I had to catch up. The next morning, I called Ben Foster. He answered on the second ring. "You alive? Barely. Where are you?" "A place I can afford without needing my inheritance." He snorted. "You get the files? I'm looking at them now." "Good. I'll come by tomorrow. We need to build this thing tight. No holes. Bring coffee. Always." He showed up the next day in a navy wool coat, holding a cardboard tray with 2 cups from a local place downtown. He didn't say much when he walked in, just looked around the apartment, nodded once, and set his laptop on the table. "All right, let's start with the basics." He connected to my Wi-Fi and pulled up the shared drive I had sent him. I handed him the printouts Erin had helped me gather from the hospital. We moved fast, flipping through documents, sorting by dates, categorizing contracts. He laid them out in piles like evidence markers. "You were smart to backdate everything. These emails and drafts are going to help." He looked up at me. "But we need something stronger, something legally binding that they can't argue is just hearsay or informal collaboration." I walked to the old file box I had carried out of the hospital and pulled out a thin folder. I have this. He opened it and froze. Where did you get this? My attorney notarized it the week before I signed the final deal. It was supposed to be standard precaution, just in case something happened. He turned the pages, slowly, eyes scanning every word. Then he looked at me again, this time like he was seeing something more. This changes everything. It was the original will dated September 12, 2022, witnessed and sealed by a certified notary. It detailed my intentions clearly. If anything happened to me, all rights to Cerebrus and its subsequent developments would remain under my sole ownership, with no authorization to transfer or assign without written consent. No exceptions. Ben leaned back in the chair. They ignored this. Or they didn't know it existed. They didn't. This copy wasn't stored in the firm's primary legal archive. I uploaded it to my cloud backup as a failsafe. He tapped the signature line. This is gold. We need to submit this with the injunction filing, but we also need to make sure it's authentic under Colorado law. Any discrepancy, they'll jump on it. He began taking photos, scanning every page into his laptop. What about the hospital documentation? I asked. He opened a second window and compared the notations with the transfer documents filed by Madison. He frowned. This is shaky. There's no chain of custody, no power of attorney filed legally, and the dates don't match. Your medical chart shows sedation for a full week post-op. There's no way you could have consented to anything, and yet the hospital signed off on it. Ben looked up. They'll claim emergency authority, family rights under medical crisis, but if we prove they had a motive and acted without legal standing, that argument collapses. I sat back, breathing slowly. The air in the room felt heavier. What's the next step? Ben reached into his briefcase and pulled out a yellow notepad. We file a motion for injunction. Freeze all activity related to Cerebrus. No licensing, no development, no profit transfer. Then we hit them with the civil suit. Fraud, forgery, unlawful transfer of intellectual property, emotional distress if you want to go full swing. He looked at me, and we do it fast, before they move the money or change the structure. I nodded. My hand rested on the folder. It felt warm. You still want to go through with this? I thought of Madison's face, the way she had looked at me in court, not afraid, just annoyed more than ever. He closed his laptop. Then let's bury them. That night I sat by the window with a notebook in my lap, writing down everything I could remember. The meetings, the emails, the jokes in passing, anything that might build a case. Erin called just before midnight to check in. Her voice was soft, tired. You okay getting there? You need anything, just keep being you. There was a pause. Don't let them scare you back into silence, Ryan. I won't. The call ended. I sat in the dark with the city lights blinking outside and the will beside me on the table. This time I wasn't going to vanish quietly. I waited 3 days before reaching out to my father. His number hadn't changed in years. I found it in an old backup of my phone stored in the cloud, buried between utility bills and pizza receipts. When I called, he didn't answer the first time. Or the second. On the third try, he picked up. Ryan. His voice was strained, older than I remembered. I hadn't spoken to him since before the fall. It's me. There was a long pause. Jesus Christ. I thought, they said, where are you? Somewhere quiet. I need to see you. He didn't ask questions. He just gave me an address. A park in Louisville, a short drive from Boulder. 10 a.m. by the benches near the Rose Garden. I arrived early. The wind was crisp and the leaves had begun to turn. I sat beneath a tree that had already shed half its color, hands buried in my coat pockets, trying not to think too far ahead. He walked up slowly, his gait stiff, probably from the heart surgery he'd had last spring. He looked thinner, paler, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "You look like hell," he said. "Thanks. You don't look so great yourself." He sat beside me, knees cracking as he lowered himself. "So you're alive. That's good." I didn't respond. I pulled the folder from my bag and handed it to him. "What's this proof?" He opened the folder, flipping through the pages. The medical reports, the legal filings, the notarized will. As he read, his hands began to shake. "I didn't know about any of this." "I believe you." He looked at me, eyes red. "They told me you were in a coma, that the doctors didn't think you'd wake up. Susan said we had to prepare for the worst. I didn't know what to do. You signed the power of attorney." "No, I didn't." I pulled out the copy from the hospital file. "This is your signature." He stared at it, his lips parted then shut again. His hands trembled. This isn't right. I remember being in recovery when they brought me something to sign, but it wasn't this." I was on blood thinners, barely coherent. They said it was insurance paperwork. Who brought it? Susan and Madison. They said it was urgent. I watched him. His mouth was dry. He blinked slowly. "They tricked you." He didn't speak for a moment, just looked out at the trees. A breeze passed, scattering red and yellow leaves across the grass. "I trusted them," he whispered. "I know." He turned toward me, his voice breaking. "Why would they do this? Your mother." "Madison. She always cared about you. She was at the hospital every day." "No, she wasn't." He flinched. "They never came. Not once." He shook his head as if trying to push the thought away. "Susan told me you didn't want visitors, that the doctors thought stress would delay your recovery. I asked to see you. She told me not to. She lied." He nodded slowly, staring at the papers again. "And Madison?" I nodded. "She forged the signature, claimed the IP, sold part of it already." Ben traced the license transfer. His face went blank, like someone had pulled the color from it. "I need to talk to them." I stood. "You should. But don't warn them. Just ask questions. See what they say." He looked up at me. "Are you going to press charges?" "Yes." He closed the folder and held it in his lap. "Then I guess I should find out who my daughter really is." I watched him walk away, slower than before, shoulders hunched. I didn't envy what came next. That night I got a text from him. "Just one line?" I asked. She denied everything. The next morning he called. She said you were unstable, that you hallucinated the fall, that it wasn't her fault. "Do you believe her?" I used to. And now? There was a long pause. She knew I was sick. She used it. She used me. His voice hardened. "I want to help. Then be quiet. Watch. Listen. Let them talk. And Madison, I'll handle her." He didn't argue. After the call, I sat by the window again, staring out at the same traffic light. I used to think my family was broken, but they weren't. They were just selfish, complicit, too comfortable with silence. Not anymore. Ben called the next morning and told me to meet him at his office in downtown Boulder. When I arrived, there was someone else already sitting at the conference table. A woman, early 40s, sharp eyes, no-nonsense posture. She stood as I entered and extended her hand. "Jenna Marks, civil investigator. I've been looking into your case." Ben nodded toward the laptop in front of her. "She found something." Jenna pulled up a document on the screen. It was a PDF of the ownership transfer Madison had submitted to Cerebrus Holdings. She tapped a line near the top of the metadata. "This file was modified 3 times before being submitted. That's not unusual. What is unusual is that each edit came from a different IP address, all within an hour, all routed through a VPN located in Eastern Europe." Ben leaned forward. Someone wanted it to look clean, but forgot about the metadata. Jenna switched windows. A new document filled the screen, the hospital's power of attorney form. "Same thing. Different fonts in the signature box. It was stitched together, and not very well. Whoever did it was sloppy with the kerning. Look here. She zoomed in. The letters in Douglas's name didn't align naturally. This wasn't scanned from a signed form. It was built. Someone copy-pasted a digital signature onto a blank. I felt my pulse quicken. Is that enough to prove forgery? Ben answered. It's enough to raise serious doubts, especially if paired with witness testimony. That's when Jenna turned toward me. There's more. Aaron called me yesterday. I sat upright. What she said there was something she hadn't told you. Something she's kept since you woke up. Jenna opened her bag and pulled out a small digital recorder. She pressed play. At first it was just static. Then Aaron's voice came through, shaky but clear. This is Aaron Woods, nurse supervisor at Boulder Medical. The following was recorded on November 15, 2022, approximately 9:17 p.m. There was a pause, then another voice, hard and cold. If you say anything about him waking up, I will make sure you never work in this state again. Do you understand me? It was Madison. My hands clenched. I looked at Ben. He didn't move, eyes fixed on the recorder. I mean it, Aaron. He's not supposed to wake up. You'll keep your mouth shut or I'll have your license revoked so fast you won't remember your own name. Aaron's voice came back small and tight. He's awake. You can't ignore that. He won't stay that way. And if you value your career, you'll forget this conversation ever happened. The recording ended. Jenna powered off the device. She made the recording on her phone, then saved it to a backup. She's willing to testify if it comes to that. Ben stood and walked to the window, running his hands through his hair. That's motive. That's obstruction. That's intimidation of a medical professional in a case tied to forged legal documents. He turned to me. This isn't just about intellectual property anymore. This is criminal. I swallowed hard, the edges of my vision sharp. So what now? Jenna answered. Now we get the timeline airtight. I cross-reference the metadata timestamps with hospital activity logs. We show the overlap between your incapacitation and the document modifications. And we connect that to Madison's recorded threat. Ben paced. We'll submit a preliminary motion to the district court. The judge will have grounds to issue a subpoena for hospital records and internal communications. If we find even one internal memo referencing the change after your coma began, it's done. I nodded slowly. And Aaron? She's nervous, but she's angry. And angry people don't stay quiet forever. Later that night, I called Aaron. You didn't have to do that. I did. She sounded tired. Not scared anymore. Just done. They think people like me will stay quiet because we need the job. Because we can't afford to fight back. I wanted to say I was sorry she had to carry that alone, but she didn't want sympathy. She wanted justice. Thank you. You're welcome, Ryan. Just promise me one thing. When you win this, don't forget who tried to erase you. I won't. I ended the call and sat in silence for a long time. They thought they'd buried me. Covered every trail, controlled every voice, but they'd left one alive. And now I had her words on tape. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Pale green walls, dark wood benches, a ceiling fan that clicked every few seconds like a metronome counting down to judgment. Ben and I sat at the plaintiff's table, the folder containing the will placed neatly between us. He looked calm. I tried to mirror him, but my palms were sweating. Natalie sat across the aisle with her attorney, a polished man with silver hair and expensive shoes. She wore a cream suit and a face devoid of emotion. If she was nervous, she hid it well. Behind her sat my mother, arms crossed, eyes darting between us like she still hadn't chosen a side. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Margot Kennedy, entered without fanfare. She took her seat, glanced at the docket, then looked up at us. We're here to address the preliminary injunction requested by Mr. Colburn regarding disputed intellectual property and potential document fraud. Ben stood. Your Honor, we're prepared to present evidence supporting the plaintiff's sole ownership of the AI software in question, as well as evidence suggesting fraudulent activity in the reassignment of that ownership. Let's hear it. Ben nodded to the clerk who wheeled in a monitor. He clicked through slides, the notarized will metadata reports from Jenna hospital logs, and finally Erin's recorded statement. The courtroom was silent as her voice played. The threat from Madison landed like a punch. The judge didn't flinch, but her eyes narrowed. Miss Harper, do you have a response to this recording? Natalie stood, her voice steady. Your Honor, my brother was in and out of consciousness during his recovery. He verbally agreed to transfer rights to me as a precaution. The paperwork followed that agreement. Ben didn't wait for the judge to respond. There is no legal record of such an agreement. No witnesses, no documentation. And we have reason to believe the documents presented were manipulated. He clicked again. The screen showed a zoomed-in signature with kerning inconsistencies. Then a report from a forensic typographer confirming the likelihood of digital forgery. The judge leaned forward. Miss Harper, do you dispute the authenticity of this report? Natalie hesitated. It's possible mistakes were made, but there was no intent to deceive. We were under emotional strain. Ben didn't miss a beat. Emotional strain does not excuse fraud, Your Honor. Nor does it explain why hospital staff were threatened into silence. He handed up a printed transcript of Erin's recording. The judge flipped through it, then turned to the defense attorney. Do you have any documentation showing Mr. Colburn's verbal agreement? Any medical authorization for power of attorney? No, Your Honor. Then based on the materials presented, I am granting the injunction. Effective immediately, all activity related to the Cerebrus software is suspended. Furthermore, I am referring this matter for criminal investigation, including potential fraud, obstruction, and coercion of medical personnel. Natalie's face didn't change, but I saw her hands clench in her lap. My mother shifted uncomfortably behind her. For the first time, there was visible space between them. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Outside the courthouse, the wind bit through my jacket, but I didn't feel it. Ben was already on his phone calling Jenna to update her. I stood at the steps watching Natalie and my mother descend. They didn't speak. They didn't look at each other. My father was nowhere in sight. I walked past them toward the parking lot. As I passed, Natalie spoke without turning her head. This isn't over. I didn't stop. No, it's not. I found her on the porch, sitting in the same chair she used to read in every Sunday morning when I was a kid. The wind rolled dry leaves across the wooden floorboards. Her hands were wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. I stopped at the foot of the steps. You asked me to come, so here I am. She didn't look at me, just nodded toward the empty chair across from her. I sat, the space between us more suffocating than the silence. You think you've won something, she said finally. I didn't answer. You think dragging this family through court will fix whatever it is you're trying to fix? I looked at her. The lines around her mouth had deepened. Her eyes were tired, but there was no softness in them. I just want the truth to mean something. She scoffed. Truth? You're still clinging to that. Life isn't about truth, Ryan. It's about survival. Is that what this was? Survival. She finally turned to face me. You were in a coma. No one knew if you'd wake up. Natalie stepped up. She made decisions. She took control when no one else could. She forged documents. She threatened a nurse. She sold what wasn't hers. And what were we supposed to do? Watch everything you built fall apart while you lay in a hospital bed. It wasn't yours to take. It wasn't just yours either. This family has sacrificed for you. Your father, me, your sister. And now you want to paint us all as villains. I stood. You're not a villain, Mom. You're just a coward. You couldn't handle the idea that your golden child was a fraud, so you let her bury me. And now that I'm back, you're trying to justify it. Her face didn't move. She just stared at me. You always were dramatic. You always looked through me like I wasn't even there. She stood, setting the mug down on the table between us. I did what I had to do, and if I had to do it again, I would, because I couldn't let a man who couldn't even stand ruin everything this family built. That hit me like a slap. I stepped back, breath catching in my throat. I wasn't even surprised. Somewhere deep down, I already knew. I just hadn't let myself say it out loud. I turned and walked to my car. She didn't follow. She didn't call out. Back at my apartment, Erin was waiting in the hallway. She handed me a flash drive. It's all on here. I made a copy for the record, but this one's for you. I took it, nodding. Thank you. She looked at me for a long time. You okay? I lied. Yeah. She didn't press. Later that night, I listened to the recording again. The same threat from Madison. The same cold voice. But this time I heard something else behind it. Fear. She hadn't done it out of hatred. She'd done it out of panic, out of the need to control what she thought was slipping through her fingers. And my mother, she hadn't acted out of fear. She'd acted out of pride. That was worse. I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling. My chest hurt, not from anger, not even from sadness, from recognition. They had never seen me as their own. Not really. I was a tool. A story they told themselves about legacy and sacrifice and expectations. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and realized I'd been crying. Not because I'd lost something, but because I finally understood I never had it to begin with. The courtroom smelled like lemon polish and old paper. I had sat in this room before, but today it felt different, heavier, like the air itself was waiting. Douglas sat on the witness stand, hands folded, jaw tight. He wore the same navy blazer I remembered from childhood church mornings. When he looked at me before taking his oath, there was something unspoken in his expression. Regret, maybe, or shame, maybe both. The judge asked him to state his name in relationship to the parties involved. Douglas Colburn, father to both the plaintiff and the defendant. Ben stepped forward. Mr. Colburn, can you describe the circumstances under which you signed the document transferring software ownership to Madison Harper? Douglas shifted in his seat. I had been in the hospital, recovering from a cardiac procedure. I was still under medication. I remember Madison bringing the papers in. She said it was urgent, that Ryan had authorized it verbally and just needed my signature to finalize things. Did you see Ryan during this time? No. Did he speak to you directly? No. Did you review the documents fully? No. I trusted my daughter. I shouldn't have. Ben let that sit for a beat. Are you aware now that those documents were not legally valid and were submitted using altered digital signatures? Douglas nodded, throat bobbing. Yes, I am. Do you believe you were misled? Yes. Madison didn't flinch. She stared straight ahead, her hands clasped in her lap. Her lawyer leaned toward her and whispered something, but she didn't respond. Jenna took the stand next. She brought her laptop and a thick folder of printouts. She laid out the timeline with precision. Metadata inconsistencies, IP traces, timestamp mismatches. She showed how multiple files had been altered post-signature and submitted from a masked server. She ended with a single sentence. There is overwhelming digital evidence that these documents were deliberately manipulated to deceive. Ben rested his case. The defense attorney tried to push back. He said the metadata could be coincidental, that the family was under stress, that Madison's actions, if misguided, came from a place of responsibility. but it was hollow. Then the judge spoke. This court finds probable cause to open a formal criminal inquiry into charges of document fraud, obstruction, and unlawful control of intellectual property. In light of the presented evidence, I am ordering the immediate detainment of the defendant pending further investigation. There was a collective inhale in the room. Madison didn't move. Then two bailiffs approached her. One reached for her wrist. She stood slowly and turned toward them. I could see it then. Not defiance, not fear, emptiness. They cuffed her hands behind her back. The clink of metal echoed like thunder in the silence. As they led her away, she looked at no one. Not me, not her attorney, not even Susan. My mother sat frozen, her lips pressed in a thin line. When Madison passed by her, she turned her head sharply and stared at the floor. She never looked up again. The judge adjourned the hearing. People began to murmur to move, but I stayed seated. The courtroom slowly emptied around me. Ben leaned in. "You okay? I don't know. You did what you had to do." I watched the door swing shut behind the bailiffs. "Yeah, I guess I did." The first step hurt. Not in a poetic, symbolic way. It actually hurt. My hip popped. My left calf screamed. My shoulder throbbed like someone had slammed it in a door, but I took it anyway. The physical therapy room smelled like rubber mats and disinfectant. My therapist, a stocky guy named Jamal, didn't baby me. He watched me struggle to lift my knee and just said again, and again, and again. It was 3 weeks before I could walk without the cane. 2 months before I could run again. Every session stripped something out of me. Every step rebuilt it. The nights were worse. I didn't dream often. When I did, I was back in that glass hallway, falling in slow motion, hearing Natalie's voice echo in the background. Sometimes my mother's face would appear cold and unreadable just watching. There were nights I thought about disappearing again. I had money. I could have vanished, started over in Oregon or Vermont or somewhere that didn't smell like old memories. Somewhere I didn't have to see my own name in legal filings or startup articles. But I didn't, because at some point I realized this wasn't just about reclaiming ownership or proving who forged what. It was about something more primitive, more personal. It was about existing. BioCore eventually reinstated my name on the contract. The board issued a formal apology which felt more like a PR statement than genuine remorse. Still, it was something. The original Cerebrus contract was honored. Investors stayed in. The company moved forward. But I didn't go back. I couldn't sit at that same desk in that same building with those same memories. Instead, I started something new. The Phoenix Trust, a fund for individuals who had been cut off, discarded, or betrayed by their own families. Not just financial support, legal aid, counseling, a place to not feel insane for mourning people who were still alive but emotionally unreachable. Aaron helped design the infrastructure. Ben handled the legal side. Jenna referred cases from her own investigative work. It wasn't flashy, but it mattered. One evening, I stood in front of a small group of people in a rec center in Denver telling them my story. I told them about the Coma, about the forged documents, about how easy it was for the people who claimed to love me to pretend I didn't exist. Some cried, some didn't. One guy came up after and just shook my hand, said thank you, and left without giving his name. That meant more than any press feature ever could. I moved into a smaller place outside Boulder. A lot of glass, a lot of light. Nothing like the house I grew up in. I didn't speak to Susan again. Douglas called once. He didn't apologize, just said he hoped I was okay. I told him I was. Madison took a plea deal. No prison time, just probation, community service, restitution. I didn't fight it. I didn't need her to be punished. She already was. She would carry the weight of her choices in every awkward handshake, every job rejection, every silence when someone realized who she was. That was enough. People still asked me if I missed having a family. Sometimes. In theory. But the truth is, I've built something better. I don't need their approval. I don't need their presence. I know who I am. I know what I survived. I know what I've built, not in spite of them, but in defiance of their expectations. I don't need them to believe in me. I believe in myself. The courthouse steps were colder than I remembered. Autumn had settled over Boulder, crisp and quiet, like the city had paused to breathe after everything had unraveled. I stood still for a moment, feeling the sunlight on my face. In my right hand was the folder. Inside, the original will, signed, stamped, mine. People walked past without noticing me. Just another man in a suit carrying papers. No one knew what had just happened inside. No one knew what it had cost. Ben walked down behind me, briefcase in hand. He didn't say anything, just clapped a hand on my shoulder once firm, then kept walking. I watched him go. I didn't feel victorious. There were no fireworks, no applause, just clarity. The kind of clarity that comes after you survive something you weren't supposed to. I took one last look at the building, the marble columns, the seal above the door. Then I turned and walked toward the parking lot, every step lighter than the one before. Back at my apartment, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for a while. No noise, no people, just me. That silence used to terrify me. Now it felt like mine. I packed my things slowly over the next 2 weeks. I didn't have much. A few boxes of clothes, books, a framed photo of me and Jamal the day I walked up 3 flights of stairs without stopping. On the final morning, I left a note on the kitchen counter for the landlord, the keys beside it. The drive to Oregon took 2 days. I didn't rush. I stopped at gas stations and diners and cheap motels. I watched people live their lives. Strangers arguing about football, old couples eating pancakes, kids screaming over spilled soda. It was beautiful. In Ashland, I rented a small cabin on the edge of a forest preserve. Big windows, wood floors, no Wi-Fi, just birds, trees, and time. I started writing again. Not code, not business plans, just thoughts, memories, things I'd never said out loud. It helped. Aaron called sometimes. Ben sent updates on Phoenix trust cases. Jenna emailed new leads. The world kept spinning, but I stayed still. One evening I stood outside watching the sun melt behind the trees and whispered to myself, "Family is not blood. Family is choice." I had chosen truth. I had chosen survival. I had chosen myself. I didn't look back. Now I want to ask you something. If the people closest to you betrayed you, lied to your face, left you when you needed them most, would you forgive them or would you face them? Let me know in the comments. And if this story moved you even a little, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. There's more to come. We tell stories that matter, stories that stay with you. See you in the next one.